You have no idea what your potential is. You have no idea what God wants to do with you. You are gonna fall and oftentimes fail more than you succeed, but in those moments that you succeed, the reward will outweigh the risk. It says the sons of Issachar understood the times and they knew what to do. And it's important that we learn to understand and come into and live into alignment with the times and the seasons. And on the Jewish calendar, we are in the decade 5780. This is the decade of the Pei on the biblical calendar. Pei is the Hebrew letter that represents 80. Okay, so there are no Roman numerals in the Bible. The way that you write numbers is with letters. So the letter 80 is written with the Hebrew letter Pei, and Pei literally means mouth. So this is the decade of the mouth, and it's also, the Pei is the letter of breakthrough. So this is the decade of breakthrough on the biblical calendar. When we think about breakthrough and we think about the letter Pei, it connects directly back to this time and season, the Passover season. Think about it for a moment. Who's the bad guy in the Exodus story? His name is what? Pharaoh. He begins with the letter Pei. Passover begins with the letter Pei. Redemption begins with the letter Pei. It says the more the Pharaoh persecuted them, the more they broke forth and expanded. That begins with the letter Pei. Breakthrough, paratz in Hebrew. Moses was 80 years old when God called him, and Moses said, I can't go because I am heavy of speech and slow of tongue. I got a problem with my Pei, it says in Hebrew, with my mouth, so send my brother Aaron. So at 80 years old, which is the way we write 80 is with the Pei, which means mouth, God told Moses to go use your Pei, and Moses didn't want to go, but he did go, and God used him to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. So everything related to the Passover is connected to the letter Pei. And one of the things this tells us is that this is a time to come out of Egypt. What we have to understand is that Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. Can you say Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt, and it comes from the word sar, which means a place of confinement or restriction. So Egypt is not just a geographical location, it is a spiritual and emotional state, okay? It's that place that wants to limit our potential, limit our calling. It wants to box us in so that we get boxed out of what God wants to do for our lives. So this is a season where it's time to break through and break out of the box, whether it's the boxes the people in our lives have put on us, whether it's the boxes the enemy has tried to place us in, or whether it's the box that sometimes we put ourselves in. It's time to come out of the box. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so what he did in the past is a picture of what he wants to do in the present. And when I think about breakthrough, when I think about this decade of breakthrough that we're in, and this year on the Hebrew calendar, 5784 is the year of the open door. So God is opening some doors, which also means there's some transitions that are going on. We're in the midst of a transition in our nation, but to understand this breakthrough that God is wanting to bring in our lives, I don't think there's any better passage. One of my favorite in the Gospels, John chapter 2. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in the Galilee, and Yeshua's mother was there. And Yeshua is Jesus' Hebrew name. And his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, Yeshua's Ima, his mother, said to him, they don't have any wine. And Yeshua said to her, woman, what does that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. When there is a detail in the Bible, it's there for a reason. God doesn't waste words. So in John chapter 2, we read he does his first miracle of the water into wine, and he does it at a wedding, and he does it on the third day of the week. Why not the fourth day of the week or the first day of the week? Okay, what's significant about the fact that he does it on the third day? Well, the third day is a day of double blessing. In the creation account, the third day of creation is the only day God blesses twice. Genesis 1:10, Genesis 1:12. He blesses it twice by saying 2 times it was tov, it was good. And so it's a day that's doubly blessed. For this reason, if you're ever in Israel on the third day, you're gonna see weddings taking place all over the place, right? So Jewish people still get married on the third day that we might be fruitful and blessed. The third day is also a day of revelation. We're thinking about the coming out of Egypt. God brings Israelites out of Egypt and he brings them to Mount Sinai. And God says to Moses, prepare the people, for on the third day I will come down on the mountain. God revealed his glory. He revealed his power at Mount Sinai, and it was on the third day. Well, this miracle that Jesus did, the first miracle, the end of chapter 2, at the end of the miracles, it tells us this is the first miracle Jesus did by which he revealed his glory. So it's a day of revelation. And Jesus is beginning to bring the revelation of who he is and the revelation of the kingdom. But there's something more. The third day is also a day of redemption, restoration, and resurrection, according to prophecy in Hosea. Hosea 6:1. Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days, he will revive us, and on the third day, he will restore us that we might live in his presence. The third day is a day of restoration. Why is that significant that he does it on the third day? Think about it for a moment. Why does Yeshua Jesus do this miracle at a wedding? Because it all began at a wedding, and it's gonna all culminate at a wedding in the messianic kingdom, the marriage supper of the Lamb, when we celebrate with him face to face in the kingdom. And so he's restoring, as we'll see, what was lost with the fall. And doing the miracle on the third day ultimately is meant to be a sneak preview of his coming resurrection that happened on the third day. So I believe God wants us not to live out of the lack, but live out of the overflow. And I want to look at some keys to living out of the overflow. The first key to living out of the overflow is faith and trust in the Lord. Think about it for a moment. Mary goes to Jesus and the servants and asks him to do something. He says, my time is not yet come. And what is Mary's response? She says to the servants, whatever he says, do it. She's expecting in faith that he is going to respond, even though it seems from his initial response, he's not going to step in and get involved. But faith moves the heart of heaven. And Jesus responds. We said the third day ties back to creation. One of the things we have to understand with breakthrough faith is that there are 2 levels of faith. There is something I call eye faith, and then there is mouth faith. Think about eye faith. Eye faith is the expression, seeing is what? Believing. But you know what? That is not the deeper level of faith. The deeper level of faith is mouth faith. Think about creation. In the very beginning, the The world was formless and void, darkness, chaos. And then God spoke and said, let there be light. And then God saw that the light was good. First, God said it, and then he saw it. That's faith. Faith is even in the midst of the darkness, having the belief in God to call forth things that are not as if they were. We think believing is seeing, but in the kingdom, the opposite true. Believing is seeing. Because you'll never see it unless you believe it. And you'll never be more than you have the ability to see. Helen Keller said the worst thing is not to be born blind, but to be born with sight and have no vision. Do we have the faith to believe even when it seems impossible? But we have to understand something. The opposite of faith is doubt. Now, Haman in the story of the book of Esther, you can't understand the story unless you understand Haman's genealogy. Haman is the biological descendant of a wicked man by the name of Amalek. Amalek was the first person to attack Israel when they left Egypt. But what opened the door to allow him to be successful in the attack? Right before he attacks them and starts to have success against them, the children of Israel at the waters of Marah doubt God. And they ask this question, is God really among us or not? Doubt opened the door to disaster. We don't want to be a doubting Thomas, right? We don't want to doubt, we want to believe. And so Haman is a descendant of Amalek. Amalek is associated with doubt in the Bible because of that incident of the attack. But also, as we shared, every Hebrew letter has a number. That means words have numerical value. The numerical value of the name Amalek also adds up to the same numerical value of the Hebrew word for doubt in Hebrew, safek. The spirit of Amalek, which is pervasive in our world today, which is a spirit of racism, discrimination. It's a spirit of compromise. It is a spirit of doubt. It wants you to doubt God's promises for your life. It wants you to doubt God's goodness. It wants you to believe that God is holding out for you. He wants you to doubt yourself. And the way we overcome, one way we overcome the spirit of Amalek and to have breakthrough is to not have doubt, but to have radical faith. And we have to understand that doubt is often rooted in fear. And so God wants to move us from doubt and fear to faith. If you want to have breakthrough faith, you have to understand that you have to have faith and trust. Do you know that you can have faith without trust, but you can't have trust without faith? There were 12 disciples in the boat. Only one had enough faith and trust to say, let me step out of the boat, Yeshua, and come to you on the water. Fear wants to keep you in the boat. Faith wants you to step out for him. And so we got to move from fear to faith and from faith to trust. The second key to living out of the overflow, okay, is having hutzpah. That's a Hebrew word. You can say hutzpah. That means holy audacity. It means spiritual boldness for God. And Mary demonstrates great chutzpah, right? Because she's not going to take no for an answer. She's like, whatever my son says, do it. Yeshua, I'm not taking no for an answer. You're going to do something. Friends, when we know God has promised, when there's a promise in the word, we don't take no for an answer. A faith that has chutzpah is a faith that is willing to take risks for God. The rabbis tell us that the last generation before the coming of the Messiah is known as the generation of the heel. Why the generation of the heel? Because they're living at the bottom. They're living in the footsteps of the Messiah. But it also connects back to Jacob. Jacob in Hebrew literally means heel. Think about it. How did he get the name? As he was coming out of his mother's womb, he tried to grab his brother's Esau heel and pull him back in so he could be the first out to get the blessing of the firstborn. Jacob had hutzpah, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But he had hutzpah to dress up as his brother to try and trick his father. That's some chutzpah, right? But we need that chutzpah. And that connects back to the story of Esther. Because think about it. Why did Haman want to destroy Israel? Because Mordecai, the Jew, would not bow down to Haman, who was the second most powerful man in the land. Listen, most people, if it means a financial loss to them, will bow down. Certainly, if they think they're going to lose their lives, they'll take a knee. But Mordecai was not willing to compromise because Haman was a descendant of Amalek. He embodied wickedness, racism, oppression, everything that's evil. And Mordecai was like, I don't care what it costs me. I'm not going to bow down and I'm not going to compromise. Where are the Mordecais today? Where are the Esthers that are willing to take the risk of their lives to go before the king and intercede? Where are the men and women? Where are the young people who say, you know what, I'm not going to bow the knee to the crazy ideologies that are out there, right? Because unless you take the risk, you have no idea what your potential is. You have no idea what God wants to do with you. You are going to fall and oftentimes fail more than you succeed. But in those moments that you succeed, the reward will outweigh the risk. Listen, we live in a performance culture where we only celebrate the success, but God celebrates the risk.